There's a liquid sitting inside every hardware store in America right now. It costs $2 to make, maybe less if you already have one of the 3 ingredients at home. And it does something that a $980 contractor, quote, cannot do better. It doesn't cover damaged wood. It doesn't mask it. It goes inside the grain and rebuilds it from the inside out, the same way this wood was protected. For the first 500 years of human carpentry before a marketing budget convinced you that was impossible without a branded product. A gray, cracked, sun-beaten fence board that looks like it belongs in a demolition pile, one coat of this liquid, and your neighbor walks over to ask when you had it replaced. A deck so weathered the contractor you called gave you a number with 4 digits in it. One afternoon with a rag and a jar and you cancel the appointment. Furniture your grandmother left you that looks like it's been asleep for 30 years. It wakes up, the grain comes back, the color comes back. The whole piece looks like someone paid a restoration shop $600 to bring it back, except you did it before lunch with things from the paint aisle. No sanding, no power tools, no stripping. No experience required. This formula is not new. That's the part that should make you angry. It existed before the Second World War. Cabinet makers in the 1930s knew it without writing it down. Craftsmen passed it to their apprentices the way you pass down a recipe because it worked every single time, on every type of wood, in every climate. Then, an industry worth $2 billion figured out what that formula was doing to their revenue, and it quietly disappeared. Not because it stopped working, because it worked too well. To understand why this liquid does what it does, you have to go back further than the 1930s. A lot further. The flax plant is one of the oldest cultivated crops humans ever grew. Ancient Mesopotamia, roughly 10,000 years ago. Egyptian tombs contain linen woven from flax fibers that is still physically intact after 4,000 years. That alone should tell you something about what this plant produces. Chinese woodworkers figured out centuries ago that pressing the seeds of the flax plant produced a golden oil. They rubbed it into timber with their hands. Over the following weeks, that oil hardened inside the wood into something closer to a natural resin than a surface coating. It repelled water. It resisted cracking. It kept the wood alive. That was the first wood finish in recorded human history. No factory, no chemistry lab, oil from a seed and patience. For the next several thousand years, every civilization that worked with wood used some version of this. Medieval European craftsmen mixed linseed oil with lead oxide to create what they called boiled linseed oil. It cured harder and faster, and the results lasted for generations. Cathedral doors in Germany treated with this mixture in the 1500s are still standing. British naval ships coated their decks with it before crossing the Atlantic. The wood survived salt water, tropical sun, and cannon fire. Then, in 1860, a British inventor named Frederick Walton left a can of linseed oil open overnight in his London workshop. By morning, a rubbery film had formed on the surface. Walton spent 3 years figuring out what had happened. The oil had reacted with oxygen and formed a natural polymer, harder than varnish, more flexible than lacquer. By 1863, he used that discovery to invent linoleum, the first mass-produced floor covering in history, built entirely on one ingredient, linseed oil from flax seeds. That same chemistry had been protecting wood for 20,000 years before Walton gave it a name. Here's what changed everything, and not for the better. In the 1950s, the petrochemical industry introduced synthetic alkyd resins, polyurethane, chemical lacquer, synthetic varnish. These products dried faster, looked shinier straight out of the can, and cost significantly more to manufacture than linseed oil, which was essentially a commodity. More importantly, they wore out faster. Polyurethane sits on top of wood like a plastic shell. It doesn't bond with the grain, it seals over it. And when that shell develops the first hairline crack, which it will because wood expands and contracts with temperature, moisture gets underneath. Blistering follows, peeling follows. Within 2 or 3 seasons, you're back to square one. The industry didn't switch from linseed oil because polyurethane was better for the wood. It switched because polyurethane was better for repeat revenue. Linseed oil, applied correctly once, lasts years. A maintenance coat takes 5 minutes. A homeowner who knows this formula calls a contractor roughly never. Polyurethane needs refinishing every 2 to 3 years. At an average of $980 per deck, over 20 years of home ownership, that's nearly $7,000 spent on one wooden platform behind your house. Multiply that across the 75 million single-family homes in America that have wooden decks, fences, porches, floors, and furniture, and you start to understand the size of the machine that depends on you not knowing what you're about to learn. The active ingredient in most of the oil-based restoration products currently sitting on hardware store shelves, the ones with recognizable brand names, television commercials, and $30 price tags, is the same drying oil chemistry Frederick Walton identified in 1860. They're selling you linseed oil with a logo and charging you 40 times the raw material cost. That is not innovation. That is a business model that only works if you never think to read the label. Here's the chemistry of what actually happens when you apply this liquid to damaged wood. Linseed oil is a triglyceride with an unusually high concentration of alpha-linolenic acid, a polyunsaturated fatty acid. When it contacts oxygen, it undergoes a process called auto-oxidative polymerization. The fatty acid chains begin to cross-link with each other, forming a flexible polymer network. What that means in practice, unlike paint or varnish, linseed oil doesn't sit on the wood surface. It penetrates into the cellular structure of the timber itself. A study published in the Journal of Coatings Technology found that linseed oil penetrates wood up to 4 times deeper than synthetic polyurethane. Once inside, the cross-linking process creates a natural resin that fills every pore, expands, and contracts with the wood through temperature changes, repels moisture, and resists scratching. The oil becomes part of the wood. That's why it doesn't peel. There's nothing on the surface to peel. Now add white vinegar to the mixture. Vinegar is acetic acid, a natural solvent that cuts through decades of oxidation, grime, and dead finish, sitting on the wood surface without damaging the healthy fibers underneath. While the vinegar is stripping that gray oxidized layer away, the linseed oil is flooding into the freshly exposed grain and beginning to polymerize immediately. The third ingredient is what makes the whole thing practical. Turpentine, distilled from pine resin, available in the paint aisle of any hardware store, thins the linseed oil so it penetrates twice as deep and cures twice as fast. Without it, the oil tends to pool at the surface and takes weeks to harden in any kind of humidity. With turpentine, it soaks in within minutes and begins curing within hours. 3 ingredients, all of them natural, all of them unpatentable. You cannot file a patent on linseed oil, acetic acid, or pine resin because they've existed in nature for millions of years. That's part of why this formula disappeared from public conversation. There's no proprietary molecule, no trade secret to protect, no brand monopoly to build. No company has a financial reason to advertise a recipe that anyone can make for $2. So nobody does. The algorithm buries it under paid results from restoration product companies. Home improvement television fills its segments with branded wood treatments. Every search for how to restore a deck returns a dollar figure, never a recipe. Before the formula, one thing you have to know. The safety warning, most DIY content skips entirely. Rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust if left crumpled in a pile while they're curing. This is not a remote risk. In 1991, a fire in the Meridian Plaza building in Philadelphia, caused by linseed oil-soaked rags, killed 3 firefighters and burned for 19 hours. When you're done applying this mixture, spread your rags completely flat outdoors to dry, or submerge them in water in a sealed metal container before you dispose of them. Don't skip this. It's the only part of this process that can hurt you. Also worth knowing, raw linseed oil without metallic drying agents can take weeks to cure in humid climates. The recipe calls specifically for boiled linseed oil. The can has to say boiled on the label, which contains drying catalysts that bring the cure time down to 24 to 48 hours. And linseed oil can yellow slightly on very light woods like maple or birch over time. On darker woods, oak, walnut, cedar, redwood, the warming effect deepens the grain in a way that looks intentional. On most outdoor wood, it's the best possible outcome. Here is the formula. What you need. 1 part boiled linseed oil. The label must say boiled. A quart runs about $4 and covers 120 to 160 square feet. 1 part white distilled vinegar. A gallon costs under $3. 1 part turpentine, also sold as gum spirits in the paint aisle. A small can runs about $5 and lasts for months. Total cost per application, under $2. How to apply it. Step 1. Combine equal parts of all 3 in a glass jar with a tight lid. Shake for 30 seconds. The mixture will turn a cloudy golden color. Step 2. Use a dry brush to sweep loose dirt, cobwebs, and debris off the wood surface. That's all the prep required. No sanding, no power washing, no chemical stripping. Step 3. Dip a clean cotton rag into the mixture and apply it along the grain using firm, even strokes. Work in sections about 2 feet wide so the liquid doesn't dry at one edge before you spread it. Step 4. Let the first coat absorb for 10 to 15 minutes, then wipe away any excess with a dry cloth. Step 5. Wait 24 hours. Apply a second coat the same way. The second coat deepens the color and doubles the protective layer inside the wood fibers. If you're working on a weathered deck, start with the board that looks worst. The gray oxidized layer will dissolve on contact with the vinegar. The oil will flood into the exposed grain within seconds. Watch what happens to one board and you won't be able to stop. You'll do the whole deck because the before and after on a single plank is that immediate. For indoor furniture, use a softer cloth, lighter pressure, small circular motions. Antique pieces respond especially well. The oil rehydrates wood that's been slowly drying for decades. Dining tables, dressers, bookshelves, cabinets. 1 application, and they look like someone paid a professional to restore them. For fences, use a wider brush or a paint roller to move faster. A fence that looked like it needed replacing will look like it was recently installed by the time the light changes. For hardwood floors, apply in thin coats with a flat mop pad, one section at a time, 24 hours between coats. The floor develops a warm satin finish that deepens with each application, the same technique used to maintain Victorian-era oak floors that are still in good condition more than a century later. 1-quart jar of mixed formula covers approximately 30 to 40 square feet. A contractor charges $600 or more for the same coverage on a deck. A floor refinishing company quotes $3 to $7 per square foot. A 200 square foot room becomes a $1,400 invoice. You just did it for less than $2 in materials and about 20 minutes of your time. Here's the part worth sitting with for a moment. This formula did not disappear because it failed. It didn't get phased out by something better. There is no better. The Journal of Coatings Technology data shows that linseed oil outperforms synthetic polyurethane on penetration depth. Cathedral doors treated with this chemistry in the 1500s are physically still standing. The formula is older than any company in the wood restoration market by a factor of thousands. It disappeared because the wood restoration industry generates nearly $2 billion a year in product sales. The broader home renovation market in the United States hit $210 billion in annual revenue last year. Deck refinishing alone costs homeowners an average of $900 to $2,700 per project, recommended every 2 to 3 years. Over 20 years of owning a home with a wooden deck, that's close to $7,000 out of pocket for a single surface. None of that math works if homeowners know about 3 ingredients from the paint aisle. You cannot patent linseed oil. You cannot patent vinegar. You cannot patent turpentine. They are natural substances that have existed since before the concept of a patent office. What cannot be patented cannot generate licensing fees. What cannot be licensed cannot build a brand monopoly. What cannot build a brand monopoly cannot sustain $2 billion in annual revenue. So the formula gets buried, not in a boardroom meeting, not through a coordinated campaign, just through the quiet, consistent pressure of a market that has no financial reason to tell you something you could figure out for $2. Every home improvement TV segment features the latest branded wood treatment. Every search result page for how to restore weathered wood is shaped by advertising dollars from restoration product companies. The $2 solution gets pushed further down with every algorithm update, every sponsored article, every television spot. Your grandparents knew this formula, or their parents did. It was written on index cards and kept in kitchen drawers, mixed in glass jars and garages across every small town. And then one generation stopped passing it down because a television commercial told them there was a better way. There wasn't a better way. There was just a more expensive way. The contractors know this formula. The manufacturers know it. It's the chemical foundation of most of their products. The $2 billion industry prays every single day that you watch the commercial instead of reading what's on the ingredient list. But now you know. 3 ingredients, equal parts. 1 jar, 1 rag, 20 minutes. That gray deck you've been looking at all summer, it could look brand new by Saturday. That fence your neighbor keeps suggesting you replace, fixed before dinner. That table your grandmother left you that looks like it's given up. 1 coat and it remembers what it is. The wood didn't die. It just needed someone to remember what the industry spent 70 years trying to make you forget.